Hey, you guys, it's fund drive time again at the Institute. Help me pay my writers. The Institute is awesome. You don't need convincing by me. You just need the address, libertarianinstitute.org/donate. Check out all the great kickbacks, including our latest book, Israel, winner of the 2003 Iraq Oil War by Gary Vogler. And we've got $10,000 in matching funds, so you can double your support without even trying. And William Van Wagenen's Syria book is almost done, too. It's so good, just you wait. But it does take resources to edit and publish these books, so your help is greatly appreciated. I'm working on Provoked every day, I promise. libertarianinstitute.org/donate. And thanks, y'all.
All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and the brand new Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. And I've recorded more than 5,500 interviews since 2003, almost all on foreign policy, and all available for you at scotthorton.org. You can sign up for the podcast feed there, and the full interview archive is also available at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show.
All right, you guys, on the line, I've got Matthew Hoh. Of course, he used to be a Marine, and then he was in the State Department, and then became the great whistleblower of 2009. He really did everything he could to try to stop the Afghan surge, the tripling of the Afghan war under Barack Obama. And you know what? I'm sorry. I know we've beaten this subject to death a million times, but let's talk about this for a minute. Welcome back to the show, Matt. How are you doing?
Good, Scott. Thanks for having me with you.
Look, I'm so happy to have you here and to talk about this because, you know, there are so many people, you know, there's a endless cycle of people in and out listening, and young people just starting to pay attention for the first time. People of all ages just starting to pay attention for the first time. People may not really know this story. And I was talking about you with our friend Tommy last night on the phone.
Yeah.
And like, I think he didn't, or no, he knew the story. He knew the story. But I guess I just thought he didn't. So I started telling it to him. But it got me thinking, though, like, people don't really know this. I like, okay, so it's Obama's first year in office. And there's this group called the Coindinistas. And they're led by David Petraeus, the general that Obama put in charge, like, pretty much right away. He gives them, I think, 40,000 troops right away. And then Petraeus and his general, he's head of Central Command. His guy, McChrystal, is going to be in charge of the war. And then you got Mullen, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Gates, the Secretary of Defense, Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of State. And you got all of the John Nagel and Michelle Flournoy and all of the Coindinistas on this massive public relations campaign. It's really comparable to, like, get your COVID shot or whatever, fly your Ukraine flag. It was this massive thing to get everyone on board on the belief that, look, we cannot just cut and run and snatch victory from the jaws of defeat here and ruin a perfectly good war. We've got to triple it and sew this thing up. And they push hard as hell all spring and summer until, was it August or September of 2009, you spoke out.
Right.
It was
actually, I resigned. So I was in Afghanistan. I was a political officer with the State Department. I had been in Iraq twice before. I was a Marine Corps officer. I also had served on a State Department team in Iraq. And that's how I end up in Afghanistan with the State Department as a political officer, first in the East and down the South. And I was there only 5 months before I resigned. When I first resigned and people asked me to explain the differences, and the similarities between Afghanistan and Iraq, I fell into that trap, and I'd be like, well, Afghanistan's this and the Iraqis are that. And, but then eventually it just came to me that the only thing that matters is the American occupation. That's it. You can talk all day long about whatever, but all that matters is the American occupation. And that's what occurred when I got there in Afghanistan in the spring of 2009. I realized this is no different than Iraq. You could dress it up. You could talk about it differently. You could point all these things out. And but the reality is that this is about occupation first and foremost, setting up and Afghanistan was different because we jumped into the middle of an ongoing civil war, a civil war that we had caused essentially in the late 1970s. Give the Soviet Union some credit for that as well too. But so what I saw was that this is a war that is not worth fighting. It's a war that we cannot win. And it's a war that is being waged for the political benefit of the White House. Just as the Iraq War, for all the different reasons for the Iraq War, you got to go back to Karl Rove's reasoning for the Iraq War, right? That wartime presidents get reelected. And this was certainly Barack Obama. As much as he wins, he beats Hillary Clinton, then he beats the war hero John McCain as an anti-war candidate, right? He was against the Iraq War. Well, you can't be soft when you're the president. You got to be, and you're a black Democrat. They're going to eat you up. And so we know this. We know that as soon as the president comes into office, he's got Rahm Emanuel and David Axelrod telling him that you need to do drone strikes to look tough. And that was the same thing with Afghanistan, that this is our way to show that we are better war fighters. We have spent decades under this idea that Democrats are wimps and we're the reasons why we lost the Vietnam War. So what it becomes is this great political effort to win Afghanistan. And that breaks apart into smaller pieces as well. It was either Alyssa Miller or Alyssa Rubin. I always mistake the two of them, but wrote a long piece for the New York Times and New York Times Magazine, published in early 2010. And I met with her, and she told me, she didn't write this in her piece, but she told me what she came away with after spending weeks with Bob Gates, the Secretary of Defense, was that Gates's only real reason to her that seemed to be for supporting the escalation of the war of Afghanistan was because he felt he had to do everything he could to give the Pentagon, to give the military a chance to redeem themselves from Iraq, to get them a win, right? I mean, so whatever level you're on here, it was political. And so you're exactly right. Barack Obama is campaigning on this idea of I'm going to get us out of the wrong war. Iraq was the wrong war. I'm going to win the right war. And Afghanistan being the war we always should have been in. And, but during the campaign, he's talking about increasing U.S. forces by 2 brigades, which is 5,000 to 6,000 troops. He puts in 70,000, plus a lot of NATO forces and a lot of contractors. And just to, I guess, put the details out if people are not familiar with it, as Scott said, when Barack Obama comes in office, there's about 30,000 U.S. troops there. There's a little more than that in terms of American contractors. And then there's about 15,000 or so NATO forces, maybe 20,000. Within a year and a half, there's 100,000 American troops, 100,000 American contractors, and 40,000 NATO troops. So by summer of 2011, you have a 250,000-man Western army in Afghanistan fighting the Taliban. And every month, the Taliban do better. It gets so bad that the Department of Defense used to have to send these quarterly reports to Congress, detailing how the war in Afghanistan is going. And literally every report, they would have taken something else out of that was in previous reports because it just showed how poor the war was going, and it couldn't keep up with their lie that we were making progress. And then, of course, we have our friend Danny Davis, who comes out in early of 2012, goes to the Congress with classified information and says, look, this is the truth. This is what's happening in Afghanistan. Your generals are lying about this war, and all of about 6 or 7 members of Congress actually pay attention to what Danny's saying. Danny, of course, proven right. But for me, proven right by time and what occurs. For me, though, I'm there 5 months. I'm in both the east and the south of Afghanistan. I see there's no difference between the with Iraq. In some ways, it's even worse. The nature of the government that we put and kept in power there. It was all warlords and drug lords, and you could see the lies that just came out of all of this idea that the Taliban controlled the drug trade. We had to be there because the Taliban were narco terrorists, and Afghanistan would fall into a narco state, just like our buddies down in Colombia, I guess, but it already was a narco state. And those of us who've been saying this have been vindicated and validated in the last few years because the UN Office on Drugs and Crime has come out and said, yeah, you know what? Actually, Taliban really weren't involved in the drug trade at all because it was all the government, it's the military who controlled it all. That's so it's just, that's one example of many. But certainly I got to the point where I also, too, having taken part in the war in Iraq twice, been involved in DC policy with these wars, man, I was intellectually and morally broken. Like I was just, and so I get to the point where the only thing I can do is resign. I can't continue to go on with this. So in September 2009, yeah, I quit. And then in October 2009, in a series of Forrest Gump-like episodes, I end up on the front page of the Washington Post.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, it's so important. And you must have known at the time, too, that, and please refresh my memory, I believe you got the ambassador, Eikenberry, who had been the former general in charge of the war, your boss, on your side, not the Secretary of State, but still pretty damn good, the ambassador to the country and the former general in charge of the war, who then just switched agencies to go be a civilian in charge of the war. And you got him on your side too. And the important point here was you were protecting Barack Obama's flank. This was a maneuver. You were telling the president, you don't have to do this. Hide behind me. Right. Hide behind Eikenberry. Invoke us. The experts just back are telling us this can't work. And I know you're skeptical of this Hoh guy, but Eikenberry, the boss, agrees with him. And Eikenberry was the general in charge just a couple of years ago. And so, and I wrote this in Fool's Errand as well, that it was just 1 year after he defeated John McCain that he gave his speech announcing the escalation of the war. It was a year and 2 weeks, 3 weeks when he gave his West Point speech. And all he had to say was, listen, I whooped John McCain's ass fair and square. That's why you call me President Obama and him Senator McCain. And because the people of the country wanted me to call these shots, not him. So pound sand, Senator. And General, if you don't like it, you can resign. I got plenty of generals. We're not going to fight this war. I talked with Matthew Hoh when I invited him to the White House to give me his briefing, and I understand what he's saying. The more we escalate, the worse we make it. It can't work. It won't work. And I'm not going to kill innocent people, and I'm not going to have innocent, or not so much innocent, they're combatants, but I'm not going to have American GIs get killed over a lost cause. This is completely stupid. A win after Iraq? Hell, look, Matt, Iraq is the good victory compared to this. They left with their tail between their legs in the middle of the night, but they didn't have a suicide bombing at the fall of Saigon airport situation going on like Biden had in Kabul, fleeing Afghanistan. Great job, Bob Gates, tripling a war, killing hundreds of thousands of people, a couple at least. At least. And if I can tell you, I'll tell you some more things, Scott, that'll make people even more sick. And but wait,
I know we're going to talk about
Ukraine. The point is, and I'm sorry because I ramble on and I babble too much, Matt. But the point is,
hey man, I've known you for 15 years. If I didn't like that you rambled, I would have stopped coming on this show a long time ago.
I forgot where I was going with it, but now I'm back. Where I was going with this was I'm just repeating myself still again, but it's important that he did not have to do this. Yes. You didn't just try. You did protect his flank. You did have his back. You did come out and object. And as you just said, end up on the front page of the Washington Post. And it was a big deal. State Department expert, Marine Corps officer veteran says, this is stupid, dude. It ain't going to work. And Michelle Flournoy ain't know what she's talking about, man. And all Barack Obama had to do was bring you and Eikenberry to the Oval Office and say, okay, tell me your case. And then it's the same kind of thing he did in Syria where he went and walked around the Rose Garden with Donnellan and then decided not to bomb Syria. Right? That's all he had to do was decide not to. And he didn't.
And we had public opinion was heading in that direction already. I mean, like for the first 7-8 years of the war, first couple of years of the war, public opinion is in favor of the U.S. presence there. By the time of the Iraq War, it's really starting to wane. By the time 08, 09 comes, the country is roughly split. By 2010, it's over. The Afghan war is unpopular. It becomes the most unpopular war in American history as ever surveyed, more than Vietnam and Iraq. In 2013, Gallup or Pew has it as 80% of Americans believe the Afghan war was a mistake, not worth fighting. But yeah, I mean, hey, it wasn't just me, Scott, though. I mean, it wasn't just Eikenberry. Eikenberry, I had to go to Kabul, and Eikenberry's like, I'm not going to let you resign. You're staying here. You're going to, and then he said, when Eikenberry says to me, and then when you leave, I will write the foreword to your resignation letter. That's how much he agreed with it. So if I said, no, I'm out of here, I go back. I've got to go meet with Holbrooke, Ambassador Richard Holbrooke, who has been put in as the special representative for Afghan and Pakistan. And I've got to go up to the Waldorf in New York because the UN General Assembly is meeting, and that's where he's at. So I go up to New York. I go into his suite in the Waldorf. I run into his counterpart, the British representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan, a guy named Sherrod Coper-Coles, who's known this region for a long time. He's been in Afghanistan for years. He gets introduced to me. He says, oh, yeah, I read your letter. Absolutely spot on. I agree with it all. Right. And then I go into Holbrooke's bed. It's a surreal thing. Here I am, this like 36-year-old, officer of the empire. And Dick Holbrooke is like laying on his bed in Waldorf, drinking a purple Gatorade with his shoes off. It's like one of those, what the hell happened to me moments. And anyway, Holbrooke says, I agree with 95% of what you're saying. The other 5% doesn't matter. I want you to be on my staff because I want you writing stuff like this that I can give to the president every day. The president had read my letter. Secretary of State Clinton had read my letter. I mean, and it wasn't just on this side, on the diplomatic side. It was on the military side. A friend I had at the time, a guy named Jack, who had been the State Department's political advisor to NATO. He said when General McChrystal's plan went around Brussels, General McChrystal's plan to escalate the war in Afghanistan, no one agreed with it. No one would sign on. No, would say it gave a thumbs up to it. But sure enough, when it came time to initial that interoffice mail and send it on, they all did. And when I asked Karen DeYoung, the Washington Post reporter who wrote this huge story about me, like this profile, like it was like an extension of Jack Kennedy's Profiles in Courage. It was ridiculous, like huge piece in the Post. Karen, why did you do this? Why did you exert this capital on me? And she said, because, and Karen DeYoung, a lot of time in DC, I mean, big associate editor at the Washington Post. Karen says, well, because, when I went and I spoke to people about this at State, at the NSC, at the CIA, at the Pentagon, they all agreed with what you were saying. That's why I wrote it. And that was the case. Everyone knew this war wasn't going to work. And so the thing is, what you have to understand, though, is the politics. It comes back to the domestic politics. So what Obama was concerned about was his reelection chances in 2012, understanding that the Iraq war was what defeated the Republicans. He didn't want the Afghan war to be that way, but also, too, he couldn't be seen as being soft, being weak. So, you go back, I tell people to read Bob Woodward's Obama's Wars all the time because it's so instructive. But one of the most instructive things in that, Scott, is what's not present. There's nothing in there. There's no reporting of Rahm Emanuel and David Axelrod going to Barack Obama and saying, Mr. President, if you pull out of Afghanistan and someone blows up a fuel tank in Times Square, they are going to hang you for it. There's nothing in there. And I can also tell you a story of what I saw personally along those lines. John Murtha, former Marine in Congress, led the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, a big deal. And Murtha was one of the first Democrats who had supported the Iraq War to really come against the war. Anyway, I get introduced to him. That's a whole other story, how that happens. But he takes me and he has me address the entire House Democratic caucus. This is in November of 2009. So I'm down in the basement of the Capitol building. The more than 200 members of the Democratic Party in the House are sitting there in folding chairs. They made sandwiches for themselves. I mean, again, it's a surreal thing. They're sitting there with like paper plates with like sandwiches on their laps, And I've got a debate Ike Skelton, who at that time is the chair of the House Armed Services Committee, and Jessica Matthews, who's daughter Jessica Matthews, who's the daughter of Barbara Tuchman, who of course wrote, the classic Guns of August and everything. And she's at Carnegie or New America or one of those think tanks that takes millions and millions of weapons contractor and Pentagon and CIA money and everything. I mean, so I got to debate them. And Murtha joins me. And so by the time we're done, though, I mean, the Democrats are stacked up behind microphones. Say, this is another Vietnam. This is another Iraq. We can't go along with it. I mean, it was amazing to witness this. I mean, and then finally a hand pops up. This Pelosi pops up in the middle. Speaker Pelosi pops up in the middle of the whole crowd there, and she quiets everyone down. She says, "I understand what you're talking about here. I know what you're saying." Essentially saying this war can't be won. This is worthless. We're sending our young men and women to die for nothing, right? But what had happened just the week before was the House had passed the House portion of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. That was the president's priority. And that's what she said. She said the president's priority is the Affordable Care Act. We cannot put him in a corner on Afghanistan. We don't have the political space to do that. We have to remain loyal to the White House. I'm paraphrasing. And that was it. That shut down. And then what you saw happen, though, was where it's interesting because I have no proof of this other than what actually occurs. I keep going on MSNBC, which we know is controlled by the White House because people who worked at MSNBC, like Cenk Uygur and Dylan Ratigan, Crystal Ball, people who used to be anchors there have said we were controlled by the White House. They keep having me on. I'm on MSNBC so often that the makeup ladies keep my mixture of makeup ready for me because I'm in there a couple times a week, And why do they keep having this guy come on arguing to get out of Afghanistan? Well, it's because Barack Obama couldn't be seen as weak or soft, but he also knew that he could lose the re-election because Afghanistan was another Iraq. So we're going to surge in Afghanistan. And then what happens, Scott, right? We're going to start pulling out in summer of 2011. And if you also see politically what happens with the Democrats, when I first start doing this and I get drawn into the congressional stuff, like almost right away through some great groups like Win Without War, and through offices like Ron Paul's office and the great Walter Jones, God bless him, the number of Democrats and Republicans who were agreeing with us behind closed doors was staggering. But they wouldn't put their name on letters. They wouldn't go on television or radio and say this. But then steadily, as we got closer to the drawdown beginning in the summer of 2011, it was like the dial was open and these people were released, right? I mean, so that by the time of August or September, I think it was September or October of 2011, we actually had a voice vote in the Senate that said we need to get out of Afghanistan. Overwhelming majority of senators say we need to get out of Afghanistan. So it was like that politics and all this are what's so important, and I think like I said, we were going to talk about Ukraine and everything, but this is like what I said would say too about people would ask me, hey, Matt, what book should I read to understand Iraq and Afghanistan? And I would say read David Halberstam's The Best and the Brightest and Neil Shaheen's A Bright Shining Line, books about Vietnam. And if you read those books and you understand those books, then you will understand Iraq and Afghanistan. And if you understand the Afghan war, particularly its escalation, the politics involved, then you will have a better chance of understanding what the hell is going on with this proxy war in Ukraine.
Yeah, true. Also, Fool's Errand by me is good.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I'm just kidding. Sorry.
Which actually, I should say it is. I mean, like, there's not a better detailed book than yours in terms of blow by blow, what happened, why it happened, and here's the consequence. It really is. Actually, I'm not just blowing smoke now because you're my friend or because I'm on the air or whatever.
You put Halberstam in my.
People should read that.
You put Halberstam in my blurb, or when you blurred my book, you compared it to Sheehan and Halberstam. So I take that as a very high compliment because I agree with you about those books. Which one of these days I'm going to do a Vietnam month or something and really dive into those and interview Gareth Porter about them or something.
My shelves aren't as organized as yours are, so there's no way I'll find it in the next 10 minutes or so. But if I wrote something like that as a blurb where I actually put some thought into it in detail, right, as opposed to like this is a must read, et cetera,
No, you gave
then
me very nice
it shows
blurbs
like
for-
how I really felt about it.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, no, you wrote very nice things about both of them.
Well, they're
and in
great
fact,
books.
hang on just 1 second for me here. You guys, I'm so proud to announce the publication of the Libertarian Institute's 14th book. It's Israel, winner of the 2003 Iraq Oil War, Undue Influence, Deceptions, and the Neocon Energy Agenda by Gary Vogler, former senior oil consultant and deputy senior oil advisor for U.S. forces during Iraq War II. Remember how I wrote in Enough Already about how Ahmed Chalabi sold the neoconservatives on a plan to rebuild the old British oil pipeline from Mosul and Kirkuk, Iraq to Haifa, Israel, if they would only get the United States to overthrow Saddam Hussein for him? And how they bought it because they are as dumb as they are corrupt? Well, Gary was there. As senior civilian consultant to the DoD and Iraqi oil ministry, he had a unique window and experience witnessing the Pentagon neocons and their machinations on behalf of Israel before and during that war. And it turns out that even though they did not get their pipeline, as Vogler demonstrates, the neocons and their Likudnik bosses figured out an effective plan B anyway. You are going to love Israel, winner of the 2003 Iraq Oil War by Gary Vogler, available everywhere. Check it out along with our other great books at libertarianinstitute.org/books. Hey, y'all, let me tell you about Robertson Roberts Brokerage, Inc. Nobody trusts the U.S. dollar anymore. Foreign governments are stocking up on gold instead of $100 bills. 1, they know they need to, and 2, that means you need to too. Interest rates are up, but for some reason, not much for savings accounts. Park your money there and watch Uncle Joe Biden just counterfeit its value away. You can see how the Fed is afraid to raise rates to beat inflation for fear of popping the current bubbles, at least before the election. So more inflation it will continue to be. Gold is your shield against monetary and price inflation, just like it always has been. Now, Tim Fry and the guys over at Robertson Roberts are recommending gold over silver since the world's almost 200 governments are putting their own pressure on the price, which should help everyone else who makes similar calls on their own. Of course, Robertson Roberts can help you with platinum, palladium, and silver, as well as gold. Don't let the Fed and the war party inflate all your savings away. Look up Robertson Roberts at rrbi.co. That's rrbi.co. Listen, since we don't have time for Ukraine, let me end with this because this is something that is very important. It's something that I talked with Tommy about last night. And it's something that, is obviously related to the story of the Vietnam War as well as the terror wars and Lord knows the consequences of what's happening in Ukraine right now over the long term. But I was telling Tommy, I saw this thing, boy, that Matt, the YouTube shorts, they got me good, dude. That algorithm had just got a whole map of my brain. And they're just like, oh, first we'll show them a guy do a kickflip down some stairs, and then we'll show them some like construction guys, and then we'll show them some war stories, and then we'll show them some this and some that. And I saw this guy interviewing this other guy, and he says, so do you have PTSD? And the guy's like, no, not really. Like, I'm fine in every way. Like, I don't really have any problems except that I wake up 5 to 7 times every night, grab my gun, and clear my house. Because I wake up 5 to 7 times a night just knowing that there's somebody broke into my house. And
yeah, he's got the normal amount of PTSD.
Yeah. So he says, I think this must be because I spent years over there grabbing guys out of their beds in the middle of the night. That was my job. And so now it's like their ghosts are coming after me or something, something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, man, what am I, a warrior? I'm not an army type guy, but I am a boy, and I was like raised in this country. And like when I watched football with my dad when I was a kid, every commercial break had get an edge on life, be all that you can be in the U.S. Army. This is for, I don't know, a large segment, but for a very important segment of the American population. This is not just foreign policy tools and this and that. This is how a boy becomes a man. This is what it means to serve your country and protect your kin and your freedom and this and that. many of the reasons I'm sure that played into your decision to join the Marine Corps when you were young, just like so many other people do, you know? But then the whole idea is, this is really the best thing that you can do, Matt, right? Don't become an engineer, dude. Become a warrior, because it's going to be good for you. But then, and I remember learning this with my own eyes as a young kid, all of the homeless people all had Army jackets on. All of them were Vietnam veterans when I was a boy in the 80s. You know, I was born in 76, right? So I'm like, I was raised in the shadow of Vietnam. And that was who were seemingly full-grown, able-bodied men out there standing on the road going, hey, man, somebody buy me a cheeseburger because I ain't going to make it. So, oh, and then the other thing is, as you know, there are a lot of veterans listening to this show too. And I know that you're a real expert on the topic of PTSD and what can be done about it and all that. So I thought, again, maybe I'd give you a chance to talk about that here at the end, and especially like maybe guys having trouble, what they could do.
Yeah, yeah. And I wasn't being glib when I said about the normal amount of PTSD. Like, that's actually the reality. Like, PTSD, as they say, is a normal reaction to abnormal events, particularly for combat veterans who more than likely suffer from what's called complex PTSD, which is essentially you've got an onion that once you deal with one of the causes of the PTSD, you've got another cause to deal with. And the best way to understand that is that if you were deployed for 7 months, 9 months, 12 months, 15 months, however long, and you spent your days going out hunting other people while other people hunted you, well, your survival system, which essentially we evolved with because of when the saber-toothed tiger would come into the cave, it's not supposed to be on 24/7 for months or more than a year on end. And your survival system gets stuck open. And your body is continuing to produce all these survival chemicals, adrenaline, cortisol, et cetera. And so you're always in that survival mode, right? I don't like to use fight, flight, or freeze because there's more nuance to it than that. I mean, it's essentially true, but like a lot of guys will say, well, that's not the case. That's not how excited I am, because you're not. And then because those chemicals are coursing through your bodies 365 days a year, and you're not in a hostile environment, a dissonance starts to occur in your brain that causes all these other secondary issues, right? The anger, the mood issues, the depression, and that leads, of course, to substance abuse and relationship problems. And I mean, one of the biggest things that doesn't get talked about is the sexual dysfunction that comes from PTSD, right? Because if you're in a relationship, but it's the same thing too. I remember I had a friend of mine years ago. She wanted to get her eggs harvested, right? She was getting older and everything. And she was playing tennis like every day of the week. And she went to get her eggs harvested. And the doctor said, I can't get any. Your body's really not kind of producing them. I can't get them. And I'm sure I'm mangling the medical aspect of this really well, so please forgive me. But essentially what they figured out, and the doctor said, stop playing tennis. And she did, and then they were able to get eggs. And what it was essentially was the body, because she was playing tennis like that every day, was under the impression that there was a threat, there was a danger, because she was moving so much like that. So the body, when it's in the survival state, shuts down non-essential things. One of those things is if you're in a relationship, and this is why veterans, you're able to, and I'll talk from my experience, able to have one night stands, hook up with people, meaningless encounters, in that, but then with the person you're in a relationship with, you can't have sex with them. And it's because your body in that PTSD state, and also too, you have to account that we also suffer from traumatic brain injury as well as moral injury, and those all overlap. It shuts down any of the non-essentials that you need to survive. And having sex with your long-term girlfriend or wife is one of those things. And so you put that in there, right? And then, okay, now you're starting to have all these tertiary effects of PTSD. And that's just one example. You can imagine how these other things play out in workplaces and schools, family dynamics with neighbors. I mean, I was at one point, my God, I'm so embarrassed about how I was with my neighbors at one point because I was just, luckily that guy walked away, or otherwise I would have thrown him down a flight of stairs, because he had left his trash out too long and I couldn't handle that. Right. I mean, like, so it gets to a point where it's so disruptive. Your mind has become so captured to the survival chemicals that are going through you. And then there's the other psychological aspects of all this is where the moral injury comes into play. You're dealing with shame. You're dealing with feelings of betrayal, guilt, shame, regret. And it's whether it's something you did or something you witnessed or the fact that you were sent over to take part in these wars that were built upon lies, demolishing the whole foundation of who you are. We were all brought up to believe that, I was 11 years old when the film Red Dawn came out, right? I mean, that movie was so impactful for our generation. And guess what? Turns out we're not the Wolverines. We're the Soviets. I mean, to have to deconstruct yourself with that, to have that an axe taken to the foundations of who you think you are, that you don't have a white hat on, man. You're wearing a black hat. You're the occupier, or the fact that your government, which you signed up to give your life to, that's saying, I wrote a blank check to the U.S. government with my name in it, and they can cash it for my life, or however that saying goes. Oh, these guys betrayed you in a heartbeat, man. I mean, so to deal with that, and then the traumatic brain injuries as well, of which the last time the VA published numbers, which was like 10 years ago, we knew of at least 250,000 veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan, at least, who had traumatic brain injury. And that was 10 years ago. And the VA, in its true fashion, just like it puts out like these suicide reports that tell you hardly anything to keep the cost down, to keep the idea of what's really going on down, same thing occurs. How come the VA hasn't updated its TBI numbers in 10 years? Well, because there's a latency with these TBIs, like the TBI deal with the explosive blast related TBI. Similar, it's not the same to like what the football players go through, right? Where their brain injury develops over time. And then it might be 5, 10, 15 years later where symptoms start to manifest and show. Well, I mean, you've got a lot of guys walking around with like these problems. They can't get their head straight. They're in agony. They can't think, all kinds of other issues. You put that all together, and you have this, trifecta of invisible wounds that are signature wounds of these wars. That, yeah, the PTSD and the moral injury, that existed before. The TBI is new because, man, we took hits that in any previous war would have killed us. So we're the first generation to be going through with this type of TBI, because of our body armor, our vehicle armor, medical care. We survived things that we should not have survived, would not have survived. We survived things that we wouldn't have survived a year or two before in the war, let alone going back to, say, Vietnam or something like that. So, yeah, I mean, you put all that together and there is this just massive cost to veterans. It compares to nothing to what the Afghans and the Iraqis went through, of course. And then there's, nothing. That's nothing as what the Afghans and Iraq, at least we had, say, our body armor and our vehicle armor. The Iraqi people didn't have that. So their suffering is just immense, but, and then you throw in other things too. I mean, it just to continue going down this road for a moment or two longer, Cost of War Project up at Brown University does great work. They just put out a study today about sexual assault in the military. Not sure if you saw that. 1 in 4 women who are in the U.S. military get sexual assaulted. 1 in 4. And the numbers of men who are sexually assaulted, while percentage-wise are small, much smaller, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of men who go through the U.S. military who get sexually assaulted, not annually, but over the course of time. I mean, so that's essentially when you get back to this idea of like what we were brought up with, what we were told it was going to be like, and then alone you get into these ideas that we were sent over for what purposes? Why were we doing this? We're not defending our country. We're defending the politics of the White House. We're defending George Bush's reelection chances. We're defending Barack Obama's image as a better wartime commander-in-chief than his predecessor, right? Or we're defending the profits of, the banks, the oil companies, the weapons companies, so forth. I mean, so it really is. It's a sickening thing. And, this is my hat's off to you all, people like you, Scott, and others who understood this. I had to learn it the hard way. Right. I had to learn it the hard way. But to folks like yourself and those listening who get this who understand this, who are open to accepting that this is the reality, not believing that Red Dawn was the reality, but understanding what the true reality was, and not having to, put yourself through this like this. But I'll also say too that I get, yeah, let me just leave it at that. Yeah.
Okay, well, listen, so for people like, where do they go to get help? The VA? Because you always hear nothing but nightmares about the VA and how they would rather, I think you just kind of referred to how, sort of obliquely, so like, they might prefer that you're dead anyway. You're less of a hassle to them, It's a government program. But then, you know what? Is this true? Trump claimed in his speech to the Libertarian Party, which I witnessed, I'm pretty sure that was where I heard him say this, that he passed a thing where essentially it's like a blank check for veterans to go get health care wherever they want. Here's a card or whatever. You can go and get private care, something like that. Was there any real change like that? Or tell me, look, if my cousin just got out of the Army and actually he's still really a mess from Iraq War II, what do I tell him to do?
Well, he's got to go to the VA. He's got to go to the VA first, get into that system. The VA, and there are some other good programs out there. There's like the Cohen's Veterans Network that has, since my understanding, is turning away from veterans and moving more towards active duty because they can get TRICARE, and that supplants that provides their revenue. So there are organizations out there, Wounded Warrior Program, Give an Hour, Semper Fi Fund. But truly, if your health issues come from your time in the military, in combat or not in combat, deployed, non-deployed, you need to go to the VA. The VA's reason for existence is because as veterans, we have issues and problems that you do not see in the greater community. So if we didn't have the VA, we would not know about Gulf War syndrome, right? If we had the VA, Agent Orange would just still be this kind of mysterious thing that's happening to these guys who are going through, right? You need that collective body to deal with the psychological aspects. You go into a private therapist and say, hey, I'm really fucked up because, I killed 3 guys. That therapist doesn't know how to handle that, let alone unpackage it with it. And the problem is that I feel like I'm a murderer. And every time I go to the Carolina Hurricanes game, I got to stand up and be applauded for everyone thanking me for being a hero. Meanwhile, I'm thinking I'm just a murderer. It's guys who are running through that in their head. You tell them to go to whatever therapist they find, on a Google search. So you got to go to the VA to get that specific help. I'm dealing with this right now. I've got explosive blast related TBI. And one of the things that's happened is the VA has been under-resourced, even though it's getting $350 billion a year. It's still under-resourced. And what happened was my neurology department, my neurologist left. They don't have anyone. They're not getting anyone. So they had to send me out to Duke Healthcare, and terrific neurologist I'm working with right now. But I go out to Duke Healthcare, and neurologists, I say, this is what I got going on. Neurologist says, I've never heard of that before. I've never heard of explosive blast related TBI. Well, right? Exactly. And people can see Scott's reaction to that. Well, yeah. And why should you? Because you're a neurologist taking care of the general community. You mean, how many explosive blast related traumatic brain injuries are there going out there?
These people don't read antiwar.com all day. God dang.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe if you know some guy from a SWAT team or somebody who was blasting a coal mine open or something like that, but other than that, how many are out there? Meanwhile, it's epidemic, in the VA. And there's just been an under-resourcing. And there's a report that came out just a week or two ago that shows that the under-resourcing has not been minimal. It's been severe shortages of doctors and nurses across every VA in the country for more than 10 years now. And I'll get political for a moment right now because Democrats are beating their chest about Tim Walz being the chair of the Veterans Committee of the House, in the House when he was there. That happened under Walz's watch, that there is this severe shortage of doctors and nurses at the VA. The issue we have right now at the VA is a cash cow. Half of the Pentagon's budget, right, goes to the weapons contractors. People want to do the same thing with the VA. The VA, that $350 billion, roughly half of it is through benefits, disabilities, paying people like me, compensation and pension, as we call it, and then the other half is healthcare. And both of those things can be assumed by contractors and done, right? So that has been the main purpose, in my opinion, in this drive to get community healthcare, as they call it, is to allow people to feed at the trough of the federal government, right? And so I have no objection to this idea of me getting a VA card and using it like Medicare or using it like TRICARE. And I've got plantar fasciitis and I need to go to a podiatrist. Do I really need to go drive to Durham, which is 25 miles from me, to go see a podiatrist, right? Do I need to go do that? Or can I see someone here in Wake Forest, right? But this idea of like, hey, this explosive blast related traumatic brain injury, the fact that you're dealing with a moral injury that makes you want to stick a gun in your mouth, like maybe you should be going to the people who actually are specializing this with the community, with the community that is being impacted by it. But this idea that the VA doesn't want to take on this for political reasons is entirely the case. So one of the things that drives me crazy is it wasn't until 2015 or 2016 the VA actually did a study examining whether or not killing has an effect on people, right? And it wasn't until only a few years ago that the folks out in the San Francisco, the Bay Area VA, who are some of the best ones, the Bay Area VA starts actually a program called Effects on Killing. Because you would go through these PTSD programs, and as well as too, they've really embraced moral injury, the VA. But 10 years ago, they were still real shy of that because they were afraid of their bosses going up to Congress and having to explain to Congress, well, these veterans are killing themselves because it's the guilt, the shame, the regret, the betrayal that is causing this combat-related veteran suicide. And if anyone doubts that, contact me. There are dozens of studies that have shown that relationship of guilt, combat, and suicide. There should be no argument at this point about it. But it's a political thing because that means, oh my God, these wars they took part in, they did something bad over there. These wars were about freedom and liberty. They were going over there to protect Americans, to keep us safe. They were fighting bad guys. They can't feel any guilt, shame, regret, betrayal about that. But that's war. It's got nothing to do with anything else. I mean, the thing I'll cite to show that is that World War II veterans, the state of California in 2010 does a study of World War II veterans. It finds that then, so these guys are in their 80s at that point. World War II veterans in 2010 are killing themselves at a rate 4 times higher than their peers are. Right? So 7 decades after the war, these guys are still killing themselves at epidemic levels. And that was the good war, man. They were the greatest generation. They saved the world from the Nazis and Imperial Japan. What do those guys have to feel bad about? That's war, though, because you're taking part in organized murder. And there's no nation that's absent from it. You talk to people in Vietnam, the same thing too with their guys. They fought the French, they fought the Japanese, they fought the French again, and then they fought the Americans and they won their freedom. And their veterans are still killing themselves, right? I mean, so it's a political thing to admit that. But yeah, I mean, it is. It's the idea, though, is that it needs to be fully resourced. But that I probably scared people off from contacting the VA. But it is your first entry point. You have to get in there, talk to someone. There's going to be delays. What you need to do, and this is what I tell guys, what you need to do is you need to enlist your wife, your mother, your girlfriend, your sister, because men in general, and then veterans in particular, we don't want to take help. We don't want to be a burden to the team. We don't want to seem weak. I could stand in front of my Marines, and I did, and told them, hey, you're feeling bad. You need to go see the doc. You need to go see the psychologist. You need to go see the chaplain, whatever. When it came to myself, though, I ain't doing that. No way. And it took me years and basically the point of killing myself that I finally did. And it was only because a woman in my life forced me to do it. And so might not be the most right, but so that's why to tell people, like, you got to, it's the women in our lives who very often are the ones who force us to do these things, and God bless them and thank you for it, because men in general, and then veterans and combat veterans in particular, we're really loath to do it, but you have to do it. You have to do it. And you have to deal with the bullshit. You got to deal with the weight and everything else. Yeah. And so, and if people want to talk to me about it, always happy to talk, always happy to help. You can contact me through my Substack, through Twitter, Facebook, whatever, you can find me.
Cool. That's great.
Contact Scott. He'll put you in touch with me.
Yeah. In fact, I think one of the few footnotes in Enough Already, because I just skipped them. I just tried to make it easy. But one of the few footnotes in there is a quote from you from a previous interview where you had listed a bunch of different organizations of different groups besides the VA, but, you know, veterans groups and I guess peer groups and whatever. I don't know if you remember, but that's in the books. If anybody has the books on the shelf, if you just flip through Enough Already, and in fact, the footnote is in both books, in Enough Already and Fool's Errand, but it's like the only footnote in Enough Already, so it's pretty easy to find in there.
Yeah, and let me give a couple other things as well. There are some states that have really excellent state level veterans programs and county level veterans programs. We had that here in North Carolina. A guy up in Franklin County helped me out and a friend so much. Virginia, I felt, was really pretty good. Some states, hey, each state's different. The other thing too is when you're going through your benefits process, and these are benefits that are meant to help you. They're your right by law to have them, and it's because something was taken away from you. These are things that will help. And a lot of us don't. It took me years to apply because I felt like I wasn't worthy. I didn't deserve it, or I didn't want to be a leech or take from the government. All those kinds of things, right? So get past that, and when you do your benefits, go to Disabled American Veterans, go to the American Legion, go to the Marine Corps League, wherever, and get help from those guys because they know what they're doing. The VA benefit system, honest to God, not sure it's still the case, but back in the days when you submit your benefit claims on paper, which wasn't that long ago, you'd submit your benefit claims on paper, they would have two stacks in the office. One for those who submitted their claims through the veteran advocates, right? Through your what's called VSOs, Veteran Service Officers. They have a stack where if it came in from the American Legion, Disabled American Veterans, it goes in this stack. They had another stack for those who submit their claims individually. So these guys who are doing it on their own, we're going to put them here. And if you don't think those two stacks were dealt with differently, I don't know what to tell you. So those are something you can do. And then one outlier, if you have a specific issue or a general question, particularly about benefits, about the VA at all, healthcare or benefits, I urge people to go to Reddit and get on the Veterans Benefit subpage for Reddit. It's an incredible resource. It's incredibly professional. The moderators are amazing. And if you put in your problem, your question, I guarantee you within a day, you will have 10 or 12 excellent answers from people who know what they're talking about, as well as people who've gone through it. So
that's great.
That's something, I really push because it's been helpful to me, been helpful for a lot of people I know. The Veterans Benefits subreddit on Reddit, check that out.
Okay, cool. Is there a place where you write regularly or do your own video or podcast or any kind of thing?
You can. Well, hey, I guess I should mention I'm the associate director of the Eisenhower Media Network. So you can look that up.
I knew that. I'm so sorry, man. I should have a real bio.
Hey, man, I've been talking to you for.
To me, you're just the hero. I don't know. Matt Hoh, the hero, everybody. But I'm sorry. So the Eisenhower Media Network, and I'm sorry, I really got to go back. The Eisenhower Media Network, and say what now?
Oh, and I've got a Substack. It's MatthewHoh.substack or something like that. And on Twitter, I'm Matthew P. Hoh, P as in Patrick, and the last name spelled H-O-H. So,
okay.
Yeah. But anyway, I appreciate it, Scott. Thanks, everyone, for listening. I will. Let me just say this. If people haven't seen that clip of Stephen Colbert saying that CNN is objective news and his audience bursting out in laughter, go and check that out.
Oh, that's funny.
What I want to say that for is because it's people like Scott, Anti-War News, Libertarian Institute, and hey, I'm a lefty, right? We and so it's not like I've got a benefit in plugging these guys. They're the reasons why people understand that there is no objectivity in the corporate press, that the mainstream media is a part of the elites of this empire, and they are not going to do anything for you that doesn't benefit their own position within the empire. And the reason why people laughed at Stephen Colbert when he said CNN was objective is because you got folks like Scott and his guys at antiwar.com telling you the truth.
Hey, thank you very much for that, man. I like to think that's true.
It is true.
Yeah. Well, and thank you, man, for everything. You're great.
All right. Thank you, Scott.
The Scott Horton Show, Anti-War Radio, can be heard on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA, APSradio.com, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and libertarianinstitute.org.